Klaus Larres joins us from the U.S. state of North Carolina. He's a professor of history and international affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So negotiations break down. The German chancellor says she'd rather go to another round of elections than try and form a minority government. But would another round of elections settle things? Because some are even suggesting that the far-right alternative for Germany party might actually pick up even more seats next time around. How do you see it?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation at the moment. But one should immediately say that, Germany now has an acting government and an acting chancellor. So there is a government, there is not chaos, so there is still stability in the country. But of course, in due course, a proper government, not an acting government, has to be formed. And essentially, I think Merkel has four options. She can continue talking with the partners she talked to for the last 4 weeks. That has proven not very successful, and I would say that is pretty useless to attempt that again. Then, of course, she has the option to go again for a grand coalition with the second strongest party in the German parliament, the SPD. The SPD has ruled that out, but I believe that perhaps the last word hasn't been spoken here, because, of course, appeals to national responsibility for the SPD need to be made, and I think the SPD would be open to these considerations. There would be, for example, the idea that you could limit a new grand coalition to something like 2 years, and after that, new elections could be held. Another option, the third option, would be a minority government. That has never been attempted in Germany since 1949, and that is a weak option. It would create unstable governments because the government would need to rely on the parliamentary opposition parties for each and every initiative, each and every bill it wanted to get through. And that leaves the fourth option, which now is being talked about increasingly, including by Merkel herself, about having new elections. But having new elections is actually not that easy, because there were only elections in September, and the German president has rightly said, the parties have now the responsibility to convert the will of the people, as expressed in September, into reality. And if you want to have new elections, you need to dissolve parliament. But parliament under the German system cannot dissolve itself. So there needs to be a parliamentary election to vote for the chancellor. And if the chancellor fails twice to get an absolute majority, then the president can dissolve president eventually. But that is a very long and cumbersome process, which would take us into February, I believe. And I think at the moment that is being discussed.
Well, Klaus, it's interesting. Gave us the overview domestically, but one news story I read really put things in perspective in terms of what's at stake. The UK needs a strong Germany with Merkel at the helm as a reliable partner for Brexit. France needs the same for proposed changes to the European Union. Spain, of course, wants it for halting Catalan independence. So instead, they're seeing uncertainty. So this really has a ripple effect beyond the borders of Germany, doesn't it?
It does, yes, and Germany is an important pillar of stability in Europe, and I would say worldwide. But on the other hand, of course, there is still a government. It is the old government which is continuing to function, with Merkel as the chancellor, the acting chancellor, and Sigmar Gabriel as the acting foreign minister. So there's not a vacuum in German politics, but of course an acting government is weaker than a proper elected government. So it has repercussions for Europe and for global politics, but perhaps not as profoundly as some commentators want to make us believe.
Some analysts say they fear in Europe, I should say, is that there's a post-Merkel era just about ready to begin. You don't see that, though.
I mean, if the SPD insisted on forming a grand coalition, but only without Merkel, then I can see that Merkel may in the end have to retire. But she is a very strong national leader. Her own party supports her strongly. And so for the time being, I can't see that Merkel will be forced into retirement. But of course, we don't know what the outcome of new elections, if there are new elections, what that outcome would be. And if here her party lost again quite profoundly, and if the right-wing AfD gained an awful lot of additional votes, that may lead to her retirement in the end. But that is quite a few months off. So for the time being, I don't think that we can talk about the end of the Merkel era. It is a possibility in a few months' time, time, but I wouldn't exclude her stamina and her skills as a negotiator. She has been in power since 2005, and she has been proven to be a very skillful negotiator and a very skillful politician. So I can see that it will not be easy to retire her and to replace her with someone else. And also in her own party, there's no one waiting in the wings. There's no clear competitor, no clear rival who could easily replace her. She has made sure in the end, you can say, that all the competitors have really vanished and that she is the undisputed leader of her own party. And also, I think the German population still is largely in support of Angela Merkel, as she has proven a very successful leader. And of course, the country is undergoing an economic boom, and any leader who happens to be in power at that time always gets the credit for having brought that about, whether or not that is correct. Yeah. So I think at the moment, Merkel is pretty unassailable.
Yeah. Well, Klaus, we're going to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.